The moment Beatrice Palmer saw the horse change hands, she understood her worth in the eyes of her father less than a chestnut mare with a white blaze and considerably less than the hand-tooled saddle that came with it. It was August of 1876 in Grass Valley, California, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty Main Street where the transaction took place, turning her world upside down in the span of a handshake between two men who had never once asked what she wanted. Her father, Gerald Palmer, had always been a gambling man, but this was the culmination of every bad decision he had made in his 53 years. The debts had piled high as the Sierra Nevada mountains surrounding their town, and when he could not pay, he offered his 21-year-old daughter instead. The man who accepted, a cattle baron named Silas Murdoch, had looked her over the way one might examine livestock, checking her teeth and the strength of her arms before nodding his agreement. She would work his ranch, cook for his hands, and do whatever else he deemed necessary to settle her father's debt of $300. Beatrice had stood there in her faded calico dress, her dark blonde hair pulled back in a simple braid, her blue eyes dry because she had learned long ago that tears changed nothing. Her mother had died when she was 12, leaving her to care for a man who saw her as nothing more than a burden he could trade away when convenient. She had no siblings, no other family to turn to, and in 1876, a woman alone had few options. So when her father signed the papers that made her Murdoch's property in all but the legal term, she simply picked up the small bag containing everything she owned and prepared to leave the only home she had ever known. That was when Thomas Barrett rode into town. He was a cowboy, 26 years old, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of whiskey in candlelight. He wore dusty trail clothes and a hat that had seen better days, and he led a string of 5 horses he planned to sell. Thomas had been working ranches and trailing cattle since he was 14, saving every penny he could, dreaming of the day he would have enough to buy his own piece of land. He had $280 sewn into the lining of his saddle bag, the result of 12 years of backbreaking work. He had stopped at the livery stable to water his horses when he overheard the conversation between Murdoch and Palmer. At first, he thought he had misunderstood. But then he saw Beatrice, saw the resignation in her eyes, the way she held herself so still it was as if she had already died inside, and something in his chest tightened with an anger he had not felt in years. "Hold on," Thomas said, stepping forward before his better judgment could stop him. His voice carried across the street, drawing the attention of several townspeople who had been watching the exchange with varying degrees of disapproval but doing nothing to stop it. "That is not right." Murdoch turned, his thick gray beard bristling. He was a large man, well-fed and prosperous, used to getting his way. "This is none of your concern, Drifter." "I am making it my concern," Thomas said evenly. He looked at Beatrice, really looked at her and saw intelligence in her eyes despite the defeat, saw the way her hands trembled slightly even though she tried to hide it. "A person cannot be traded like property." "She is settling her father's debt," Murdoch said, "all legal and proper. Now move along before I have the sheriff remove you." Thomas knew the sheriff would side with Murdoch. Money talked in towns like this, and a cattle baron had more influence than a traveling cowboy ever would. But he also knew he could not walk away, could not leave this woman to a fate she clearly had not chosen. He thought of his savings, of all those years of work, of the land he had planned to buy. Then he thought of his own mother who had died when he was young, worked to death by his father's indifference and cruelty. He had sworn then that if he ever had the chance to help someone in a similar situation, he would. "I will pay the debt," Thomas heard himself say. The words hung in the air, and he saw Beatrice's eyes widen in surprise. $300, that is what you said, right? Palmer's face lit up with greed. You have $300. I have 280, Thomas admitted. And this mare here. He gestured to one of his horses, a fine bay with good lines. She is worth at least 50, that more than covers it. Murdoch's face reddened. Now wait just a minute, we had an agreement. No agreement is signed yet, Thomas pointed out, nodding toward the papers still in Palmer's hand. And I am offering more than your horse and saddle are worth. Palmer looked between the two men, calculating. Murdoch might have influence, but Thomas was offering cash money and a horse right now. Deal, he said quickly, before either man could change their minds. You cannot be serious, Murdoch sputtered, but Palmer was already reaching for Thomas's money. The cowboy pulled out his saddle bag and counted out the bills and coins he had worked so hard to save. Each dollar felt like a piece of his dream dying, but when he looked at Beatrice again and saw the first glimmer of hope in her expression, he knew he was making the right choice, even if it made no practical sense. The transaction completed quickly after that. Palmer took the money and the horse and disappeared into the saloon before anyone could reconsider. Murdoch stood there for a long moment, glaring at Thomas with undisguised hatred, before finally stalking away with a promise that the cowboy had made an enemy today. Thomas turned to find Beatrice staring at him with an expression he could not quite read. Up close, she was prettier than he had first realized, with delicate features and a dusting of freckles across her nose. But it was her eyes that caught him, the way they seemed to hold both question and caution, hope and fear all at once. Why did you do that? She asked quietly. Her voice was softer than he expected, with a slight roughness that suggested she had spent time shouting over wind or distance. You do not even know me. I know enough, Thomas said. I know you did not choose this, and I know what it is like to feel trapped by circumstances beyond your control. He took off his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair, suddenly aware of how dusty and trail-worn he looked. I am Thomas Barrett. People mostly call me Tom. Beatrice Palmer, she said automatically, then her expression shifted, became bitter. Though I suppose I am Beatrice Barrett now, if that is how this works. One man trades me for a horse, another buys me with his life savings. No, Thomas said firmly. The word came out sharper than he intended, and he softened his tone. You are Beatrice Palmer. That is your name, and it stays your name unless you choose different, and you are not bought. You are free. I paid your father's debt so you would not have to, but that does not give me any claim on you. You can go wherever you want, do whatever you want. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Go where? Do what? I have no money, no family worth the name, and no prospects. In case you have not noticed, the world is not particularly kind to women with nothing. Thomas could not argue with that. He had seen enough of the world to know she was right. Women alone faced dangers and difficulties he could barely imagine. Then travel with me for a while, he suggested. I have work lined up at the Johnson Ranch about 30 miles north of here. They are always looking for good hands, and I heard they need someone to help the cook. It is honest work, fair pay, and you would have your own quarters. No obligations, no strings. Just a chance to earn some money and figure out what you want to do next. Beatrice studied him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of deception or hidden motives. She had spent her whole life learning to read men, to anticipate her father's moods and avoid his anger when the drink was in him. This cowboy seemed genuine, but she had been fooled before. Still, what choice did she have? Staying in Grass Valley meant eventually falling into Murdoch's clutches anyway, or worse. At least with Thomas Barrett, she would be moving forward, not standing still waiting for the next disaster. All right, she said finally. I will come with you to this ranch. But I work for my keep and nothing more. I am not anyone's property and I am not anyone's charity case. Understood, Thomas agreed. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first she had seen from him. It changed his whole face, made him look younger and less worn by the world. We should leave soon. I want to put some distance between us and Murdoch before nightfall. He is the type to cause trouble when he feels slighted. They prepared to leave quickly. Thomas had his 4 remaining horses and his gear, and Beatrice had her single bag. He helped her mount one of the horses, a gentle gray mare that seemed to sense her nervousness and stood perfectly still. Thomas noticed she sat the horse well, comfortable in the saddle despite her situation. As they rode out of Grass Valley, Beatrice looked back only once at the town where she had spent her entire life. She felt no sadness at leaving, only a strange sense of relief mixed with uncertainty about what came next. Beside her, Thomas Barrett rode easy in the saddle, his attention on the trail ahead and occasionally on her, checking to make sure she was managing all right. They rode in silence for the first hour, both lost in their own thoughts. The August heat had started to fade as afternoon moved toward evening, and the air smelled of dust and pine and the wild herbs that grew along the roadside. Around them, the California landscape rolled in golden hills dotted with oak trees, beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Finally, Beatrice broke the silence. You gave up everything for someone you do not know. That was either the kindest thing anyone has ever done or the most foolish. Probably both, Thomas admitted. He had been asking himself the same question for the past hour. $280. Years of work. His dream of his own land, probably delayed by another 5 years at least. And for what? A woman who made it clear she wanted nothing to do with him beyond basic civility. But then he remembered the look in her eyes when her father had traded her away, and he knew he would make the same choice again. My mother was treated poorly by my father. He never hit her, but he might as well have. He worked her until there was nothing left, never cared what she wanted or needed. She died when I was 10, and I always wondered if someone had helped her, given her a way out, whether she might have lived. So maybe I did it for her as much as for you. Beatrice felt something shift in her chest at his words. I am sorry about your mother. That must have been hard. It made me who I am, Thomas said simply. Taught me that having power over someone does not make it right to use it. Taught me that money can always be earned again, but you cannot undo standing by and doing nothing when someone needs help. He glanced at her. But I do not want you to feel beholden to me because of it. I meant what I said. You are free to make your own choices. I have never been free, Beatrice said quietly, almost to herself. I do not even know what that would feel like. They made camp that night beside a creek that ran cold and clear from the mountains. Thomas proved efficient at setting up, and Beatrice noticed he automatically assumed she would want her own space, placing her bedroll on the opposite side of the fire from his. He caught fish from the creek for their dinner and cooked them over the fire with some beans and coffee. As they ate, Beatrice found herself watching him, trying to understand this man who had upended his life for a stranger. He was not particularly handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something appealing about him nonetheless. He had an easy competence about him, the kind that came from years of hard work and self-reliance. His hands were calloused and scarred, working hands, but they were gentle when he handed her the tin plate of food. Tell me about this ranch we are going to, she said, wanting to fill the silence with something other than her own thoughts. Thomas poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks drifting up into the darkening sky. The Johnson Ranch is a good-sized operation, maybe 3,000 head of cattle. Old man Johnson runs it with his 2 sons. They treat their workers fair, pay on time, provide decent food and shelter. I worked for them a couple years back, which is why they sent word they wanted me to return. They are looking to expand their operation and need experienced hands. And you think they will hire me too? Beatrice asked. The cook is getting on in years and has been asking for help. Mary Johnson, the old man's wife, runs the household side of things. She is a good woman, firm but fair. If you are willing to work hard, she will give you a chance. Beatrice nodded slowly. Hard work had never scared her. She had been keeping her father's house since she was 12, cooking and cleaning and managing on almost no money. At least at the Johnson ranch, her work would be appreciated and paid for, not taken for granted by a man who saw her as little more than an unpaid servant. "Can I ask you something?" Thomas said after a moment. "I suppose you have earned that right. What would you have done if I had not stepped in? If you had gone with Murdoch?" Beatrice was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat, matter of fact. "I would have endured it for as long as I could. Then, when I could not endure any more, I would have waited until he was asleep, and I would have killed him. Then I would have run, and eventually they would have caught me and hanged me, and that would have been the end of Beatrice Palmer. So you see, you did not just save me from Murdoch. You probably saved me from the gallows too." The casual way she said it chilled Thomas. He believed she meant every word. "I am glad I was there then." "So am I," she said softly. She looked at him across the fire, and for the first time she smiled. It was a small smile, tentative but genuine. "Thank you, Thomas Barrett. I know I am not being particularly gracious about this whole situation, but I am grateful, truly." "You are allowed to be angry about what happened," Thomas said. "You are allowed to be untrusting and cautious. The world has not given you much reason to be otherwise." They talked a bit more that night, sharing small pieces of their pasts. Thomas told her about growing up in Nevada, about learning to ride and rope on various ranches across the West, about his dream of eventually owning his own land. Beatrice told him about her mother, who had been kind and gentle and had tried to shield her daughter from her father's worst impulses. She told him about learning to read from an old school teacher who had lived next door, about the books she had managed to collect and read by candlelight, about the dreams she had once had of something more than Grass Valley. When they finally settled down to sleep, Beatrice lay awake for a long time, staring up at the stars visible through the branches above. She could hear Thomas breathing steadily on the other side of the fire, and she realized she felt safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. This man, this stranger who had given up everything to help her, had asked for nothing in return. She did not quite know what to do with that, how to process such unexpected kindness. The next day they continued north, and Beatrice began to relax slightly. Thomas proved to be easy company, not talking too much but willing to answer her questions about the landscape they passed through and the ranching life she was heading toward. He treated her with a respect she had rarely experienced from men, never talking down to her or assuming she could not understand things. On the third day of their journey, as they crossed through a particularly isolated stretch of country, trouble found them. There were 3 of them, rough-looking men who appeared suddenly from behind a stand of rocks. One of them pointed a rifle at Thomas while the other 2 spread out to either side, effectively surrounding them. All 3 looked like they had been living rough, their clothes dirty and their faces hard. "Well, well," the one with the rifle said. "What do we have here? A cowboy and his lady friend out for a pleasant ride." He spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "We will be taking those horses. And whatever money you got, and maybe the lady too, depending on how cooperative you are." Thomas's mind raced. He had a pistol on his hip, but he could not draw it before the man with the rifle shot him. Beatrice sat frozen on her horse beside him, her face pale. After everything they had been through, after getting her away from Murdoch, they were about to be robbed or worse by common bandits. "I do not have much money," Thomas said carefully, keeping his hands visible. "Spent most of what I had a few days back." "You are welcome to what little I have left and the horses. Just let the lady go. She has nothing to do with this." "I will decide what she has to do with this," the bandit said, his eyes moving over Beatrice in a way that made Thomas's blood run cold. "Pretty thing like that is worth something." Beatrice felt the fear that had been her constant companion for the past week surge up again, threatening to overwhelm her. She had escaped one nightmare only to ride straight into another, but then something inside her hardened. She had told Thomas she would have killed Murdoch rather than submit to whatever he had planned, and she meant it. She would not be traded or taken or used ever again. Before anyone could react, she jerked her horse's reins hard, making the mare rear up. The sudden movement startled everyone, including Thomas's horses, which began to mill and panic. In the confusion, Thomas drew his pistol and fired at the man with the rifle, hitting him in the shoulder. The rifle discharged harmlessly into the air as the man fell. The other two bandits scrambled for their own weapons, but Thomas was already moving. He fired again, missing but driving one of the men behind cover. Beatrice, acting on pure instinct, kicked her mare straight at the third bandit, who threw himself aside to avoid being trampled. "Ride!" Thomas shouted at her. "North, follow the trail." But Beatrice did not run. Instead, she grabbed a large rock from the ground and brought it down hard on the head of the bandit who had dived away from her horse. He crumpled, unconscious or worse. The remaining standing bandit, seeing his companions down, decided discretion was the better part of valor and ran for the rocks, disappearing from sight. Thomas kept his gun trained on where the man had vanished, but no further shots came. After a few tense minutes, he dismounted and quickly checked the two downed men. The one Beatrice had hit was unconscious but breathing. The one he had shot was cursing and holding his bleeding shoulder, his rifle well out of reach. "We need to leave," Thomas said urgently. "The third one might come back with friends, or these two might have more companions nearby." They gathered Thomas's scattered horses quickly and rode hard for the next 2 hours, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the ambush site. Finally, when Thomas judged they were safe enough, they stopped to let the horses rest and catch their breath. "That was incredibly brave and incredibly foolish," Thomas said to Beatrice, his voice shaking slightly with the aftermath of fear and adrenaline. "You could have been killed." "So could you," Beatrice shot back. Her hands were trembling now that the danger had passed, but her voice was steady. "You told me to run, but I am tired of running. I am tired of being something that happens to instead of someone who makes things happen. I would rather die fighting than live as someone's property ever again." Thomas looked at her with newfound respect, and something else he did not quite recognize yet. This woman had just faced down armed bandits without hesitation. She had saved his life back there, of that he had no doubt. The third bandit would have shot him while he was focused on the first two. "You are remarkable," he said quietly. "I hope you know that." Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I did what needed doing, same as you have been doing for me." They reached the Johnson Ranch 2 days later without further incident. The ranch sprawled across a valley between rolling hills, with a main house, bunkhouse, barn, and various outbuildings arranged in a rough semicircle. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures, and the whole operation had an air of prosperity and good management. Mary Johnson proved to be everything Thomas had promised. She was a sturdy woman in her 50s with gray streaked hair and kind eyes that missed nothing. When Thomas introduced Beatrice and briefly explained her situation, omitting the more sordid details but making it clear she needed work and a safe place to stay. Mary simply nodded and showed her to a small room off the kitchen. "You will bunk here," Mary said. "It is not fancy, but it is private and the roof does not leak. Meals are at dawn, noon, and dusk. You will help old Charlie with the cooking and help me with the house as needed. Pay is $20 a month plus room and board. We expect honest work and honest dealing, and we give the same in return. Questions?" "No, madam," Beatrice said. "Thank you for the opportunity." "Thank Thomas," Mary said, but her eyes were assessing Beatrice carefully. "He vouched for you, and he is a good judge of character. Do not make him regret it." Thomas, meanwhile, settled back into ranch work with the ease of long practice. The Johnsons remembered him well and were glad to have him back. He was assigned to the bunkhouse with the other hands and thrown immediately into the work of preparing for the fall cattle drive. Over the following weeks, Beatrice proved herself in the kitchen and around the ranch house. She was a hard worker and a good cook, better than old Charlie had been in his prime. The ranch hands appreciated the improvement in their meals, and Mary Johnson appreciated having someone capable and reliable to help her manage the household. Beatrice found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life. She woke before dawn to start breakfast, spent her days cooking and cleaning and mending and preserving food for winter, and fell into bed each night exhausted but satisfied. It was hard work, but it was her work, done for fair pay and treated with respect. No one shouted at her or belittled her efforts. When she did something well, Mary Johnson told her so. When she made mistakes, the older woman corrected her kindly and showed her the right way. She saw Thomas regularly, though rarely alone. He ate with the other ranch hands in the main dining room, and sometimes she would catch him watching her as she moved between the kitchen and the tables, serving food and clearing plates. When their eyes met, he would smile, and she found herself smiling back, a small warmth growing in her chest. One evening about a month after their arrival, Thomas found her sitting outside the kitchen door, taking a rare moment of rest and watching the sunset paint the hills gold and orange. He approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. "It is a free country," she said, then smiled to take any sting from the words. "Please sit." Thomas settled onto the step beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the sun sink lower. "You seem happy here," Thomas observed. "I am," Beatrice admitted. "Or at least I am more content than I have been in years. The work is hard, but it is mine. The money I earn is mine. My time, my choices, my life, all mine for the first time I can remember." She looked at him. "You gave me that. I do not think I ever properly thanked you." "You do not need to thank me," Thomas said, but he was pleased nonetheless. "I am just glad to see you thriving. You have made quite an impression around here. Mary told me yesterday that you are the best help she has had in a decade." She said that. Beatrice felt absurdly pleased by the second-hand compliment. "She did." Thomas hesitated, then continued. "The fall cattle drive starts next week. I will be gone for about 2 months, maybe longer depending on how the trail goes. We are driving the herd to San Francisco." "Oh." Beatrice felt an unexpected pang at the news. Over the past month, she had grown accustomed to seeing Thomas regularly, even if they rarely had time for extended conversation. His presence had become a comfort, a reminder that she was safe and that someone cared about her well-being. That is a long time. "It is good money, though," Thomas said. "Trail drives pay better than regular ranch work. I am hoping to start rebuilding my savings, working toward that land I want to buy." Beatrice felt a twist of guilt. His savings, the ones she had cost him. Thomas, about the money you spent in Grass Valley. I want to pay you back. It might take me a while, but I will do it. Every penny." "No," Thomas said firmly. "I told you before there is nothing to pay back. That money bought your freedom, and that is worth more than any piece of land. Please let it go. But your dream can wait a bit longer." Dreams are patient. They do not run off if you do not catch them immediately. He turned to face her more fully. "Beatrice, I need you to understand something. I do not regret what I did, not for 1 second. Seeing you here, seeing you coming back to life, that is worth far more to me than $280. There was something in his voice, in his eyes, that made Beatrice's breath catch. She suddenly saw him not just as her rescuer, not just as the kind cowboy who had given up his savings for a stranger, but as a man. A good man, strong and gentle and honest in ways she had not known men could be. She realized she had been half in love with him for weeks now, maybe since that first moment when he had stood up to Murdoch despite having no reason to do so. "Thomas," she said softly, not even sure what she wanted to say next. But before either of them could continue, one of the ranch hands came around the corner looking for Thomas, needing his help with one of the horses. The moment passed, and Thomas rose to go, looking back at her once with an expression she could not quite read. After he left, Beatrice sat alone in the gathering darkness, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart was beating too fast. She had not wanted anything from anyone in so long, had not let herself hope or dream or feel beyond the bare minimum necessary for survival. But Thomas Barrett had awakened something in her, some possibility she had thought long dead. The next week passed in a flurry of preparation for the cattle drive. The ranch was organized chaos as the hands readied equipment, gathered supplies, and made final preparations. Beatrice helped Mary prepare enough food to last the men the first few days on the trail, and she tried not to think about how much she would miss seeing Thomas every day. The morning of the drive, she woke even earlier than usual to make sure the men had a good breakfast before they left. The dining room was loud and boisterous, the hands excited about the adventure ahead despite knowing how grueling the work would be. Thomas sat at his usual spot, but his eyes kept finding her across the room. When breakfast ended and the men filed out to mount up, Thomas lingered behind. He found Beatrice in the kitchen, her hands in dishwater, and for a moment they just looked at each other. "Be safe," she said finally, hating how inadequate the words felt. "I will. You too, stay out of trouble while I am gone." "I do not go looking for trouble," Beatrice protested. "No, but it seems to find you anyway." Thomas smiled, but it faded quickly. "Beatrice, when I get back, I would like to talk to you, really talk if you would be willing." "About what?" Her heart was hammering again. "About the future, about possibilities, about what happens next for both of us." He took a step closer, close enough that she could see the exact color of his eyes, that whiskey gold that sometimes looked brown and sometimes amber, depending on the light. "I know it has only been a couple months since we met, and most of that time you have been figuring out who you are now that you are free. I do not want to rush you or pressure you, but I would like to know if maybe, when I come back, you might consider letting me court you properly." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, the kind she had almost forgotten could exist. "I would like that very much," she whispered. Thomas's face split into the widest smile she had ever seen from him. He reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and gently cupped her cheek with his calloused hand. "Then I will work harder than I ever have to get back here as fast as possible." From outside came a shout, the trail boss calling for Thomas. He dropped his hand reluctantly and stepped back. "I have to go. I know. Go before they leave without you." He turned to leave, paused in the doorway, and looked back. "Wait for me, Beatrice Palmer." "I will," she promised. Then he was gone, and she was alone in the kitchen with soap-slicked hands and a heart fuller than she had ever imagined it could be. The 2 months that followed were the longest of Beatrice's life. She threw herself into her work with even more dedication, grateful for the distraction. Mary Johnson, who missed nothing, seemed to understand what was happening and was kind enough not to comment on it, though Beatrice sometimes caught her smiling knowingly. Letters came occasionally from the trail, brief messages from various hands that Mary read aloud at dinner. They had reached Stockton. The herd was moving well. They had lost 3 head to a river crossing, but otherwise things were going smoothly. Thomas's name was mentioned in passing, always in connection with solving some problem or handling a difficult situation with his usual competence. Beatrice hung on every word, hungry for any scrap of information about how he was doing. At night, alone in her small room, she let herself imagine what might happen when he returned. She pictured them courting, whatever that might look like in the context of ranch life. She imagined him asking her to marry him, imagined saying yes, imagined a future that had seemed impossible just a few short months ago. But she also felt fear. What if he changed his mind while he was away? What if he came back and decided he had made a mistake, that he did not really want to court someone like her, someone who came with nothing but a history of being traded away like livestock? What if she was not good enough, not worthy of the kind of happiness he offered? Mary Johnson found her one evening sitting outside, looking unusually melancholy. The older woman settled beside her with a sigh, her day's work finally done. "You are thinking too much," Mary observed. "I can hear it from here." Despite herself, Beatrice smiled. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who has been where you are. Let me tell you something, girl. When I met Harold Johnson 32 years ago, I was the daughter of a drunk and a woman who had abandoned us both. I had nothing but the dress on my back and a reputation that was not my fault, but that folks talked about anyway. Harold was the son of a successful rancher, someone who could have had his pick of respectable girls from good families. But he picked me. You know why?" Beatrice shook her head. "Because he saw me, not my circumstances. He saw who I was, what I was capable of becoming if someone just gave me a chance. And he was smart enough to know that sometimes the people who have had to fight hardest are the ones with the most to offer." Mary patted her hand. "Thomas Barrett sees you the same way Harold saw me. He is not making a mistake, and you are not unworthy. You are exactly what you should be, and that is enough." "How do you have such faith in people?" Beatrice asked. "After everything you have been through, how do you still believe things can work out?" "Because they can, if you are brave enough to let them. The world is hard and often cruel, but there is good in it too. There are people like Harold, like Thomas, like you too, who try to make things a little better. You just have to be brave enough to reach for the good when it is offered, instead of waiting for the other shoe to drop." Beatrice thought about that conversation often in the weeks that followed. She tried to have faith, to believe that Thomas would return, and that they would have the chance he had spoken of. She tried to imagine herself as someone who deserved happiness, someone whose past did not define her entire future. 2.5 months after he left, Thomas Barrett rode back into the Johnson ranch dusty, trail worn and eager to see her. He arrived just after dawn, and the first person he looked for was not the trail boss to report in, but Beatrice. He found her in the kitchen, kneading dough for the day's bread. She looked up when she heard footsteps and froze, her hands covered in flour, her hair pulled back in a simple bun with a few strands escaping to frame her face. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the weeks of separation hanging between them. Then Beatrice smiled, and Thomas crossed the room in 3 long strides. He stopped just short of touching her, mindful of propriety and the fact that Mary Johnson was somewhere nearby, but his eyes said everything his hands could not. "You came back," Beatrice said, hating how obvious the statement was but unable to think of anything better. "I said I would." "Did you doubt me?" "Every single day," she admitted, "but I hoped anyway, smart woman. Hope and doubt are not opposites, they are partners. They keep you balanced." He glanced at her flour-covered hands. "Are you at a place where you can take a break, or do I need to come back later?" "The bread can wait," Beatrice said immediately. She wiped her hands on her apron and called out to Mary that she was stepping outside for a few minutes. Mary's response was something between a laugh and a knowing hum that made Beatrice blush. They walked away from the buildings, toward the fence line where they could see the morning sun illuminating the hills. Thomas seemed nervous, which was strange to see on a man usually so confident. He kept starting to speak, then stopping, then starting again. "I have been thinking about you every day," he finally said. "About what I said before I left. I need to know if you have thought about it too, or if you changed your mind, which would be all right. Well, not all right exactly, it would hurt, but it would be your right to do so." "Thomas," Beatrice interrupted gently, "I have not changed my mind. I have thought of little else for the past 2.5 months. He looked at her with such hope and vulnerability that her heart ached. "So you will let me court you, properly, the way you deserve?" "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will." The smile that broke across his face was like the sun coming up. He reached for her hand, still cautious, still respectful, and held it gently. "I want to do this right, Beatrice. I want to take time and let you be sure. I want everyone to know that you are choosing this, choosing me because you want to, not because you feel obligated or because you think you have no other options." "I know I have options now," Beatrice said. She stepped closer to him, closing the distance between them. "I could stay here and work for Mary and save my money and eventually go anywhere, be anyone. You gave me that freedom. But I am choosing to stay, and I am choosing to see where this goes with you because I want to. Because in the past months, I have come to care for you more than I thought possible." "Beatrice," he breathed her name like a prayer. Then slowly, giving her every opportunity to stop him, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and perfect, everything a first kiss should be. Beatrice felt warmth spread through her entire body, felt the last walls around her heart finally crumble. When they pulled apart, she was smiling so wide it almost hurt. "I have wanted to do that since Grass Valley," Thomas admitted. "Since I saw you standing there, so brave and so hurt, and I knew you were someone extraordinary. Even covered in flour and smelling like a kitchen," Beatrice teased, "especially then. They courted through the fall and into winter." Thomas was attentive but never pushy, always making sure Beatrice felt comfortable and free to set the pace. They took walks together in the evenings after the day's work was done. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. He taught her more about horses and cattle, and she taught him to appreciate books, reading aloud to him from the small collection Mary Johnson maintained. The other ranch hands noticed, of course, and there was some good-natured teasing directed at Thomas. But it was clear to everyone that this was serious, that they were not just passing time but building something real. Mary and Harold Johnson watched with approval, glad to see two people they liked finding happiness together. As the months passed, Beatrice bloomed. She had always been pretty, but now there was a light in her eyes that had not been there before. She laughed more easily, smiled more often, moved with a confidence that came from knowing she was valued for herself. The frightened, defeated woman who had arrived at the ranch had transformed into someone strong and sure. Thomas changed too, though more subtly. He had always been capable and hardworking, but now there was a contentment about him, a sense of purpose beyond just earning wages. He worked harder than ever, not just to prove himself, but because he was building toward a specific future, one that included Beatrice. In February of 1877, as winter loosened its grip, and the first signs of spring began to appear, Thomas asked Harold Johnson for a private conversation. The old rancher, who had seen this coming from miles away, invited him into his office and poured them both a whiskey. "I have a fair idea what you want to talk about," Harold said, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "But go ahead and say it proper." "I want to marry Beatrice," Thomas said simply. "I am asking your permission not because she needs it, she is her own woman, but because I respect what you and Mary have done for both of us, and I want your blessing. You have it, son. You have had it since you first arrived here with that girl, giving up everything to help someone you barely knew. That told me everything I needed to know about your character." Harold paused, considering. "But I assume the challenge is not getting permission. It is figuring out how to provide for a wife when you are working someone else's land. I have been saving every penny from the trail drive and my wages since then. I have enough now to put down on a small place, nothing fancy, but land of my own. There is a homestead about 15 miles north that is available, 160 acres. The house needs work and the land needs clearing, but it is a start. I spoke with the owner yesterday and he will sell for $200 down and the rest on payment terms." Harold nodded slowly. "That is the old Peterson place. Good water, decent grazing. It will be hard work getting it into shape. I am not afraid of hard work. No, I can see that. But have you considered that you could stay here? I am not getting any younger, and my boys are interested in the business side more than the daily operations. I could use a good foreman, someone I trust to manage things. The pay would be better than what you could make on your own for the first few years, and you would have security." It was a generous offer, more than Thomas had expected. But he had thought long and hard about what he wanted, what kind of life he wanted to offer Beatrice. "I appreciate that, Mr. Johnson, more than I can say. But I need to do this on my own. I need to build something that is mine, ours. I need to prove to myself as much as to Beatrice that I can provide for a family. She has spent her whole life dependent on other people's whims and charity. I want to give her a home that no one can take away. I understand that, felt the same way when I was your age." Harold stood and extended his hand. "Then you have my blessing and my congratulations. Mary will be thrilled. She has been dropping hints for weeks about how nice it would be to have a wedding around here." Thomas shook his hand gratefully, then went to find Beatrice. He had planned to propose properly, to make a special occasion of it, but when he saw her in the kitchen garden gathering early greens, he could not wait another moment. "Beatrice," he called, and she looked up, smiling that smile he loved. "What is it? You look like you are about to burst with news." "Marry me," he blurted out, all his careful planning forgotten. "I know I should probably do this better, with flowers or poetry or something romantic, but I cannot wait. I love you, Beatrice Palmer. I love your strength and your courage and your kindness. I love how you are with Mary, patient and caring. I love how you laugh at my terrible jokes and how you scrunch up your nose when you are concentrating. I love every single thing about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much." Beatrice stood there with greens in her hands and tears streaming down her face and nodded. "Yes, yes, Thomas Barrett, I will marry you. I love you too. I did not think I could love anyone, did not think I had it in me after everything. But you showed me how. You gave me back myself, and now I want to give that self to you, freely chosen." He pulled her into his arms, not caring that she was getting dirt on his shirt, not caring that several ranch hands were probably watching from somewhere. He kissed her thoroughly, pouring months of longing and hope and love into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he pulled a simple gold ring from his pocket. "It was my mother's," he said softly. "The only thing of hers I kept. She would have loved you." Beatrice looked at the worn gold band, clearly old and precious, and felt a lump form in her throat. "I will treasure it always." He slipped it onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. They stood there in the garden, holding each other as the afternoon sun warmed them, two people who had found each other against all odds and chosen to build a future together. They were married 6 weeks later, in early April of 1877, in the Johnson ranch house, with Mary and Harold standing as witnesses, and the ranch hands filling the room to capacity. Beatrice wore a simple dress that Mary had helped her make, cream-colored calico with blue trim, and she carried wildflowers picked that morning from the hills. Thomas wore his best clothes, which were still trail-worn but clean and pressed, and he looked at her throughout the ceremony, as if she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The local minister, a Methodist circuit rider who passed through the area monthly, performed the ceremony. When he asked if Beatrice took Thomas to be her husband, she said, "I do," in a clear, strong voice that filled the room. When Thomas repeated his vows, his voice caught slightly with emotion, but his hand holding hers was steady. They celebrated with food and music, and the ranch hands played fiddles and harmonicas. Someone produced a jug of whiskey and toasts were made. Mary Johnson cried happy tears and hugged Beatrice fiercely. "You deserve this happiness," she whispered. "You deserve all of it." That night, Thomas and Beatrice stayed in a room Harold had offered them in the main house, a kindness that gave them privacy for their wedding night. They were both nervous, Beatrice because of her inexperience and lingering fears from her past, Thomas because he wanted everything to be perfect for her. "We can take this as slow as you need," Thomas said gently as they stood together in the room, the door closed behind them. "There is no rush. We have the rest of our lives." "I am not afraid," Beatrice said, and she realized it was true. Whatever nervousness she felt was the normal kind, not the terror she would have expected. With Thomas, she felt safe. "I trust you. I want this, want you." He kissed her softly and then less softly, and she responded with growing confidence. They learned each other slowly, tenderly, with patience and care. Thomas was gentle but passionate, always checking to make sure she was all right, always putting her comfort first. And Beatrice discovered that physical intimacy with someone you loved, someone who respected and valued you, was nothing like she had feared. It was beautiful and connecting and exactly right. Afterward, they lay together in the darkness, her head on his chest, his arms wrapped around her. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, and she felt a contentment so deep it almost frightened her with its intensity. "I used to think happiness was something that happened to other people," Beatrice said softly. "I used to think I would just survive, just endure until I did not have to anymore. I never imagined this." "Neither did I," Thomas admitted. "I had plans for land, for a ranch, for financial security. But I did not have plans for love, did not think that was something in the cards for someone like me. Then I saw you in Grass Valley and everything changed. Do you ever regret it, spending that money, changing all your plans?" "Not for a single second. That money bought me something far more valuable than land. It bought me you, bought us this chance." He tightened his arms around her. "Besides, we are going to have our land now anyway. The Peterson place is waiting for us." They left the Johnson ranch 2 weeks later, after helping prepare for spring roundup, and saying heartfelt goodbyes to Mary and Harold, and the others who had become like family. The Johnsons had given them a generous wedding gift of supplies and equipment, and several of the ranch hands had pitched in with household goods they would need. The ride to their new home took most of a day. As they approached the property, Beatrice felt her excitement growing. This was theirs. No one could trade it away or take it from them. This was the future they would build together. The house was rough, just as Thomas had warned. It was a simple two-room cabin with a stone fireplace, wooden floors that needed repair, and windows that did not quite close properly. The barn was in better shape, sturdy enough to house the horses they had brought, and there was a good well with sweet water. Beatrice stood in the middle of what would be their bedroom, looking around at the dusty, neglected space, and felt tears prick her eyes. Thomas, seeing them, immediately looked concerned. "I know it is not much now," he said anxiously, "but I will fix it up, make it better. Give me a few months and this place will be proper comfortable." "These are happy tears," Beatrice assured him, laughing through them. "This is perfect, Thomas. This is ours, and it is perfect." They spent the next months working from dawn to dusk, fixing up the house and starting to work the land. Thomas cleared fields and repaired fences and laid plans for expanding their small herd. Beatrice scrubbed and repaired and gardened, transforming the neglected cabin into a real home. She made curtains from fabric she had bought with her savings and whitewashed the walls until they gleamed. She planted vegetables and herbs, and she cooked meals over their fireplace that made their small home smell like heaven. It was hard work, harder than anything either of them had done before, but it was theirs. Every improvement they made, every fence post set and floor board replaced, was a piece of their future taking shape. And through it all, their love grew deeper and stronger. They made love often, learning each other's bodies and preferences, growing comfortable in their intimacy. Thomas never failed to be gentle and attentive, and Beatrice discovered a passionate side of herself she had not known existed. Their small cabin rang with laughter and quiet conversations, and sometimes the sounds of their pleasure in each other. In the fall of 1877, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. She was terrified at first, unsure if she was ready for motherhood, unsure if they could manage with a baby when they were working so hard just to establish themselves. But when she told Thomas, his face lit up with such joy that her fears began to melt away. "A baby," he kept saying, like he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby." He pulled her into his arms and held her carefully as if she might break. "Are you happy about it?" "I know we did not exactly plan this so soon." "I am happy," Beatrice said, realizing it was true. "I am scared too, but I am happy. We can do this, right? We can do anything together," Thomas said firmly. "We have already proved that." Thomas became even more protective than usual as her pregnancy progressed. He insisted she not do heavy work, taking on extra himself to compensate. Beatrice rolled her eyes at his hovering but secretly loved it. No one had ever cared for her this way, ever treated her and her well-being as something precious. Mary Johnson visited when she could, bringing supplies and advice and reassurance. She had raised 3 children to adulthood and had lost 2 more in infancy, so she knew both the joys and sorrows of motherhood. She taught Beatrice what to expect and helped her prepare for the birth. In May of 1878, after a long and difficult labor, Beatrice gave birth to a son. They named him Henry Thomas Barrett, Henry after Beatrice's grandfather who had been kind to her as a child, and Thomas after his father. The baby was healthy and loud, with his mother's blue eyes and his father's dark hair. Thomas held his son for the first time with shaking hands, staring down at the tiny face with an expression of wonder. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Beatrice. Thank you for this gift." Beatrice, exhausted but happy, watched her husband cradle their child and felt her heart swell with love. This was her family. This man and this baby were hers, and she was theirs, and no one could ever take that away. Motherhood proved challenging but rewarding. Henry was a demanding baby, colicky and fussy, but Beatrice handled it with the same determination she brought to everything else. Thomas was a devoted father, walking the floor with his son in the middle of the night, changing diapers without complaint, and talking to the baby constantly as if he could understand every word. Their ranch grew slowly but steadily. Thomas made trips to Sacramento occasionally to sell cattle, and the profits, though modest, went back into improving their land and building their herd. By 1880 they had 50 head of cattle, a dozen horses, and a flock of chickens that Beatrice managed. Their cabin had been expanded with a proper bedroom for Henry and a larger living area. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable and secure. In the fall of 1880, Beatrice found herself pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in April of 1881, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Mary Barrett. Sarah because Beatrice had always loved the name, and Mary after the woman who had given her a chance when she needed it most. Sarah was an easier baby than Henry had been, calmer and more content. Henry, now almost 3, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything. Watching Thomas teach their son to be gentle with the baby, Beatrice felt a contentment so deep it sometimes brought tears to her eyes. The years passed, marked by small triumphs and occasional setbacks. They lost cattle to a harsh winter in 1882, but recovered the following year. Henry started learning to ride almost before he could walk properly, showing his father's natural affinity for horses. Sarah proved to have her mother's determination and her father's gentle nature, a combination that served her well. In 1883, Harold Johnson passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72. Thomas and Beatrice attended the funeral, bringing Henry and Sarah to pay their respects. Mary Johnson, though grieving, seemed at peace with her loss. She had had 32 good years with a man she loved, and that was more than many people got. At the funeral, Mary pulled Beatrice aside. "I want you to have something," she said, pressing a small wooden box into her hands. "Harold and I talked before he died, and we agreed. This is for you and Thomas." Beatrice opened the box to find $200 in bills and coins. "Mary, no, we cannot accept this. You can and you will. Harold never forgot that Thomas gave up everything to help you when no one else would. He said that kind of character deserved to be rewarded. This is not charity, it is gratitude. Take it and use it to keep building your future." Through tears, Beatrice hugged the older woman who had become like a mother to her. "Thank you for everything. For giving me a chance when I was nothing and no one." "You were never nothing," Mary said firmly. "You were always someone extraordinary. You just needed the opportunity to prove it." Thomas and Beatrice used the money to buy an additional 80 acres adjoining their property, expanding their ranch significantly. With the extra land, they could increase their herd and truly establish themselves as successful ranchers. The Peterson place, as people still called it, became one of the more prosperous small ranches in the area. In 1885, at the age of 30, Beatrice found herself pregnant again. The pregnancy was harder than the previous 2, and there were moments when she worried. But in January of 1886, she gave birth to another son, whom they named William Harold Barrett. William because they liked the name, and Harold in honor of the man who had been like a father to Thomas. With 3 children now, life became even busier. Thomas hired a hand to help with the ranch work, a young man named Peter who was hardworking and honest. Beatrice managed the household with the same efficiency she brought to everything, raising their children, maintaining the home, and even helping with the ranch accounts. The children grew quickly. Henry showed promise as a rancher, following his father everywhere, and soaking up everything Thomas taught him. Sarah proved to be remarkably intelligent, learning to read at a young age from the books her mother treasured. William was still too young to show his personality fully, but he was a happy, sturdy child who rarely cried and seemed content with whatever was happening around him. One evening in the spring of 1887, after the children were finally asleep, Thomas and Beatrice sat together on the porch they had built onto their cabin. The house had grown over the years, expanded and improved until it was a proper home, comfortable and well built. The barn was full of horses and cattle, the fields were green with spring grass, and in the distance they could hear the sound of the creek that ran through their property. "You remember Grass Valley?" Beatrice asked softly. "That day when you rode into town and everything changed?" "I remember it like it was yesterday," Thomas said. He took her hand, his thumb rubbing across her wedding ring, the one that had been his mother's. "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever seen, standing there so still and dignified even though your whole world was falling apart." "I remember thinking you were insane," Beatrice admitted with a smile. "Spending all your money on someone you did not even know. I could not understand why anyone would do that. And now I understand that some people are just good all the way through. You saw someone who needed help, and you helped, even though it cost you dearly. You gave me back my name and my freedom, and then you gave me so much more. You gave me a home and a family and a life I never dreamed was possible." Thomas pulled her close, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "You know what the truth is. I thought I was saving you that day. But really, you saved me. I had money and plans, but no purpose, no one to share any of it with. You gave me everything that matters. You are the reason I wake up happy every morning. You and our children, you are my whole world." They sat there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Two people who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and built something beautiful together. Beatrice thought about how far she had come from that frightened woman being traded for a horse and saddle. She had reclaimed her name, her freedom, and her life. More than that, she had found love and purpose and joy. "I love you, Thomas Barrett," she said quietly. "More than I have words to express. I love you too, Beatrice Barrett, more than my own life." They stayed on the porch until full dark, talking about their plans for the ranch, about their children's futures, about all the possibilities that lay ahead. Inside the house, their 3 children slept peacefully, safe and secure in the home their parents had built through love and hard work. The years continued to pass. Henry grew into a fine young man, skilled with horses and cattle, thoughtful and hardworking like his father. Sarah proved to be bright and determined, eventually attending the school that had been established in a nearby town, hungry for learning. William grew strong and steady, the peacemaker among his siblings, always ready with a smile. In 1895, when Beatrice was 40 and had long assumed her childbearing years were behind her, she found herself pregnant one last time. The pregnancy was difficult, and both she and Thomas worried. But in March of 1896, she gave birth to twin girls they named Emma and Grace. The babies were small but healthy, and their arrival was celebrated by the whole family. Henry, now 17, was gentle and patient with his baby sisters. Sarah, 14, took on the role of big sister with enthusiasm, helping her mother care for the twins. William, 10, was fascinated by the babies and constantly wanted to hold them. Thomas, now 45, held his twin daughters with the same wonder he had shown with Henry 18 years earlier. 5 children, he said, shaking his head in amazement. "We have 5 children, Beatrice." "How did we get so lucky?" "Hard work, faith, and love," Beatrice answered. She was tired from the difficult pregnancy and twin birth, but watching her husband with their daughters filled her with contentment. "We built this, Thomas, together." As the 1890s drew to a close, the Barrett Ranch had become one of the most respected operations in the area. Thomas had earned a reputation for honesty and fairness in his dealings, and Beatrice was known for her kindness and her skill in managing their home. Their children were all healthy and thriving, each developing their own personalities and interests. Henry eventually took over much of the daily ranch management, allowing Thomas to slow down a bit as he approached 50. Sarah, to no one's surprise, became a teacher, commuting to the school in town several times a week. William showed an interest in horses specifically and began training them, developing a reputation for his patient, effective methods. The twins, Emma and Grace, were alike in appearance but different in temperament. Emma was bold and adventurous, always climbing things she should not and exploring where she should not go. Grace was quieter and more thoughtful, preferring to sit with her mother and learn to sew or cook or read. In the spring of 1900, as the century turned, Thomas and Beatrice celebrated their 23rd wedding anniversary. They stood together on their land, looking out over the ranch they had built from nothing, and reflected on the journey that had brought them here. 23 years, Beatrice said wonderingly. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together." "I cannot imagine my life without you," Thomas said. He was 50 now, his hair graying at the temples, his face lined from years of sun and wind. But his eyes, when he looked at her, held the same love and devotion they always had. "You are the best decision I ever made." "I did not think I was a decision," Beatrice teased gently. "I thought I was an impulse you acted on before your common sense could stop you." "The best impulse I ever had, then." He pulled her close, and she leaned into him, comfortable and secure after all these years. "Do you ever think about that day in Grass Valley, about how different things could have been if I had just ridden past?" "Sometimes," Beatrice admitted. "I think about the woman I was then, so hopeless and defeated. I barely recognize her now. You gave me a life, Thomas. A real life with choices and freedom and love. You gave me everything. You gave me just as much. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose. You made me better than I was." They stood there together as the sun set over their land, over the home they had built, the family they had raised, the life they had created from nothing but determination and love. Inside the house, they could hear their children, Henry discussing ranch business with William, Sarah reading to the twins, the everyday sounds of a family living and loving and being together. "We did all right," Thomas said softly. "We did more than all right," Beatrice corrected. "We did everything right." As they grew older, they watched their children build their own lives. Henry married a local girl named Catherine in 1902 and brought her to live at the ranch. She was a good match for him, practical and hardworking, and she quickly became part of the family. By 1905, they had given Thomas and Beatrice 3 grandchildren, 2 boys and a girl. Sarah married a fellow teacher in 1903, a kind man named David who appreciated her intelligence and independence. They settled in Sacramento, where he took a position at a larger school, but they visited regularly, and Sarah never forgot her roots. William continued working with horses, eventually expanding into breeding them. He married in 1906 a woman named Alina who shared his love of horses. They built a house on the far end of the Barrett property, close enough to be part of the family operation but far enough to have their own space. The twins, Emma and Grace, were inseparable through childhood. As they grew into young women, they remained close, despite their different temperaments. Emma wanted adventure and talked about traveling, while Grace wanted to stay close to home and family. Thomas and Beatrice watched them develop, knowing they would each find their own paths in time. By 1910, Thomas and Beatrice were in their 50s, grandparents several times over, with a prosperous ranch and children who had all turned out well. They had far exceeded any dreams they might have had that day in Grass Valley 34 years earlier. They still worked, though not as hard as in their younger days. Thomas still rode out with Henry to check on the cattle, and Beatrice still managed the household and helped Catherine with the grandchildren. But they also took time to simply be together, to sit on their porch in the evenings and talk about everything and nothing, to hold hands like young lovers even though they were middle-aged and well-established. On a warm evening in August of 1910, exactly 34 years after Thomas had ridden into Grass Valley and changed both their lives forever, they sat together on that same porch, watching their grandchildren play in the yard while Henry and Catherine prepared dinner inside. 34 years, Beatrice said, echoing her thoughts from a decade earlier. More than half my life now, I have been Beatrice Barrett longer than I was Beatrice Palmer. Do you ever miss her, that girl you were before? Beatrice considered the question seriously. No. She was a victim of circumstances, someone who had things done to her rather than someone who made things happen. I am glad she existed because she became me, but I do not miss being her. I like who I am now much better. I am rather fond of who you are now too, Thomas said with a smile. He had aged well, she thought. He was still strong despite being in his late 50s, still capable of a full day's work if needed. His hair was more gray than brown now, and his face was deeply lined, but she found him as handsome as ever. We should probably think about what happens next, Beatrice said. Henry and Catherine are more than capable of running this place now. We could step back a bit more, maybe travel some if you wanted. Travel where? Thomas asked, curious. In all their years together, they had rarely left the area. There had been too much work, too many responsibilities. I do not know. Sacramento maybe to visit Sarah more often. San Francisco to see the ocean. I read about it in books, but I have never actually seen it. Maybe even back to Nevada to see where you grew up if you wanted. Thomas thought about it. The idea of traveling, of having time that was just theirs without the constant demands of the ranch, appealed to him. They had worked hard for over 3 decades. Maybe it was time to enjoy the fruits of that labor. I like that idea, he said. Let us talk to Henry about it. If he and Catherine are comfortable taking on more responsibility, maybe we could take a few trips, see some things we have never seen. They did exactly that. Over the next few years, they took several trips, always returning to the ranch but allowing themselves to experience more of the world. They visited San Francisco and stood on the beach, Beatrice seeing the Pacific Ocean for the first time and feeling overwhelmed by its vastness. They traveled to Nevada and saw the places Thomas had worked as a young man. They went to Sacramento regularly to visit Sarah and her growing family, but they always came home to their ranch, to the land they had built their life on. That was where they belonged, where their roots had grown deep. In 1914, war broke out in Europe, though it seemed far away and irrelevant to their California ranch. But by 1917, when America entered the conflict, it touched even them. Henry, now 39 and with a family of his own, was too old for the draft, but some of the young men who worked on the ranch enlisted or were called up. They followed the news anxiously, grateful their own sons were either too old or too young to serve. The war ended in 1918, and life gradually returned to normal. The ranch had weathered the war years well, and the next generation was firmly in control now. Henry and Catherine managed the operation with skill, and William's horse breeding business had become quite successful. Sarah was still teaching, though her children were growing up and starting families of their own. The twins, Emma and Grace, had both married by 1920. Emma had found a man who shared her love of adventure, and they moved to San Diego, where he worked in the growing aviation industry. Grace had married a local farmer and lived just a few miles away, visiting her parents regularly. Thomas and Beatrice, now in their 60s, settled into the rhythms of grandparenthood and eventual great-grandparenthood. They had lived long enough to see not just their children establish themselves, but their grandchildren growing up as well. It was more than they had ever dreamed possible. In the summer of 1925, they celebrated their 48th wedding anniversary. The whole family gathered at the ranch for the occasion. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filling the house and yard with noise and laughter and love. As Thomas and Beatrice stood together watching the chaos and joy of their gathered family, they felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. 48 years, Thomas said, pulling Beatrice close. They were both showing their age now, moving slower, tiring more easily. But the love between them had never wavered, had only grown deeper and more comfortable with time. Who would have thought that impulsive decision in Grass Valley would lead to all this? It was the best decision either of us ever made, Beatrice said. She leaned her head on his shoulder, the gesture as natural as breathing after nearly 5 decades together. You gave me everything, Thomas. A name, freedom, a family, a life. Everything. We gave it to each other, Thomas corrected gently. I could not have built any of this without you. You were always the strong one, the brave one. I just gave you the opportunity to show it. They watched their family together, counting their blessings. 5 children, all alive and thriving. 14 grandchildren. 6 great-grandchildren with more on the way. A ranch that had prospered and grown beyond their initial dreams. Most importantly, they had each other, still in love after 48 years, still finding comfort and joy in each other's presence. Promise me something, Beatrice said quietly. Anything. Promise me that when we are gone, someone will remember our story. Not for us, but as a reminder that good people exist, that kindness matters, that love can grow even from the worst circumstances if you are brave enough to reach for it. I promise, Thomas said. He kissed the top of her head, a gesture he had made thousands of times over the years. Our story will be remembered. How could it not be? It is a good story, one worth telling. They lived several more years in contentment, watching their family continue to grow and thrive. Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1928, at the age of 77. He had lived a long, full life, and he died in the home he had built, surrounded by the family he loved. Beatrice grieved deeply but not desperately. They had had 51 years together, which was more than most people got. She had loved and been loved in return, had built a life from nothing, had raised children who were good people in their own right. She missed Thomas with an ache that never quite went away, but she also felt grateful for every moment they had shared. She lived another 5 years, staying active and engaged with her family, telling stories about the old days to grandchildren and great-grandchildren who listened with wide eyes. She told them about being traded for a horse and saddle, about the cowboy who gave her back her name and her freedom, about building a life from nothing but love and hard work. In the fall of 1933, Beatrice Palmer Barrett passed away quietly at the age of 78. She died in the house Thomas had built for her, in the bed they had shared for over 50 years, surrounded by children who loved her and mourned her passing. They buried her next to Thomas on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Henry placed a simple marker that read, Beatrice Palmer Barrett, 1855–1933. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, she chose freedom, found love, and built a legacy. The ranch continued under Henry's management and eventually passed to his children. The Barrett name remained associated with the land for generations, and the story of Thomas and Beatrice became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. The tale of the cowboy who spent his life savings to save a woman from being traded, who gave her back her name and freedom, and then won her heart honestly, became a reminder to all who heard it that one moment of courage and compassion could change everything. That love could grow from the darkest circumstances. That sometimes the best decisions were the impulsive ones made from the heart rather than the head. And on warm summer evenings, when the whole family gathered at the ranch for reunions and celebrations, someone would invariably tell the story again. They would talk about Grass Valley in 1876, about a desperate trade and an unexpected rescue, about two people who found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The story lived on, generation after generation, a testament to the power of kindness, the possibility of redemption, and the enduring strength of love freely given and freely received. Thomas and Beatrice Barrett had started with nothing but each other, and they had built a legacy that would last long after they were gone. Their story proved that sometimes all it takes to change a life is one person willing to stand up and do the right thing, one person brave enough to reach out when someone needs help, one person ready to see past circumstances to the person underneath. Thomas had given Beatrice her freedom, and she had given him a reason to use that freedom wisely. Together, they had created something neither could have built alone. And so the story ended, as all good stories do, with love triumphant, with family gathered, with a legacy built on the simple but powerful foundation of two people who chose each other every single day for 51 years. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind more than land or money or possessions. They had left behind proof that even in the hardest times, even when the odds seemed impossible, love could win if you were brave enough to fight for it.